Hope Logan never expected that a quiet afternoon at Forrester Creations would turn into the most devastating moment of her life. But when Eric Forrester summoned the entire family to the design room under the guise of celebrating the company's legacy, the air itself seemed to vibrate with dread. And as Hope stood beside Brooke, clutching her mother's hand, she sensed something was terribly wrong long before Eric spoke. Because the patriarch's voice trembled not with age alone, but with the weight of a truth he had buried for decades, a truth that had grown poisonous with time. And as the Forresters gathered, Ridge tense and guarded, Steffi alert and suspicious, Thomas unreadable, Donna pale with worry, and even outsiders like Liam and Finn sensing the gravity of the moment, Eric finally confessed that his life's greatest failure was not a failed marriage or a broken business deal, but a secret hidden in the bloodlines of the family itself, a DNA secret so dangerous and so irreversible that it threatened to shatter everything they believed about who they were. Because Eric revealed that years ago, during a turbulent period marked by betrayal, illness, and desperation, he authorized genetic testing on multiple family members after a mysterious medical scare hinted at a hereditary condition that could be fatal if passed on undetected, and in his fear of destroying the family, he chose silence over truth, choosing to protect his name rather than protect the people he loved. And as Eric's confession spilled out in halting fragments, Hope's heart began to race, because she realized instinctively that this secret was not abstract or distant but personal, intimate, and aimed directly at her, since Eric revealed that Hope's DNA carried a dormant but lethal genetic marker, one that could activate under extreme stress or pregnancy complications. A marker that did not originate from Brooke, as everyone assumed, but from a hidden paternal line that had been altered through deception and lies. And as Eric admitted that the man Hope believed to be her biological father was not genetically linked to her at all, the room erupted into chaos. But Hope heard none of it, because the words deadly, DNA, and secret echoed in her mind like a death sentence. And when Eric finally said the words aloud, that Hope's biological origins were tied to a past scandal involving experimental genetic intervention meant to save a dying heir decades ago, Hope's knees buckled, and she burst into tears, sobbing not only from fear of death, but from the crushing realization that her entire identity had been constructed on a lie. And as Brooke demanded answers with fury and disbelief, Eric confessed that the intervention involved a clandestine medical program that manipulated genetic material to eliminate a fatal disease in an unborn child. A program that succeeded medically but created unpredictable consequences that would not surface for generations, consequences that had now surfaced in Hope, whose recent fainting spells and emotional instability were early warning signs of the gene awakening. And as doctors were consulted and files were produced, the Forresters learned that Hope's condition could be managed but never cured, requiring lifelong monitoring and the avoidance of extreme emotional trauma, a cruel irony given the chaos of her life. And as Liam rushed to her side, promising that nothing would change his love, Hope could barely look at him, because her tears were not only for herself, but for the children she dreamed of having, dreams now clouded by fear and medical risk. And when Steffi questioned whether Eric had the right to keep such a secret, Eric collapsed into remorse, admitting that he believed revealing the truth earlier would destroy Hope's chance at a normal life. But by hiding it, he had stolen her ability to choose. And as Ridge confronted his father with barely contained rage, accusing him of playing God with people's lives, Eric revealed the final, most devastating layer of the truth, that the DNA manipulation linked Hope genetically to a branch of the Forrester family thought long extinct, making her both an outsider and an heir, legally and biologically, to a legacy she never asked for, a revelation that sent shockwaves through the room, because it meant Hope had a claim not only to the family name, but to the company itself. And as legal implications surfaced and old rivalries reignited, Hope sat trembling, tears streaming down her face, whispering that she didn't want power or inheritance or secrets. She just wanted to know who she was and whether she would live. And as Finn explained the medical realities with compassion, outlining treatment plans and lifestyle changes, Hope's fears shifted from panic to grief, mourning the version of herself who believed life was simple. And when Eric approached her, kneeling despite his frailty, begging forgiveness for condemning her to a life shaped by secrecy, Hope looked at him through tears and said that forgiveness was not something she could give yet, because every choice she had made, every love, every fight, every dream had been influenced by a truth she was denied, and as Brooke wrapped her daughter in her arms, vowing to protect her from whatever came next, the family realized that Eric's deadly DNA secret was not just a medical revelation, but a moral reckoning, forcing each of them to confront how far they would go to protect their name, their legacy, and themselves. And as news of the revelation threatened to leak beyond the walls of Forrester Creations, Hope's tears became a symbol of something larger, the cost of secrets passed down like heirlooms, beautiful on the outside and lethal within. And as the episode closed with Hope staring at her reflection, whispering that she would not let a gene define her destiny, the future of the Forrester family hung in the balance, forever changed by the truth Eric had hidden for so long. A truth written not just in documents or memories, but in Hope's very DNA, altering everything she thought she knew about love, family, and survival. Hope Logan never imagined that the day would begin with sunlight streaming gently through the windows of the Forrester living room and end with her world collapsing in on itself. But that was exactly what happened when Eric Forrester, frail yet resolute, gathered the family together and delivered a revelation so devastating it rewrote everything they thought they knew about love, loyalty, bloodlines, and destiny. Because as Hope stood there beside Brooke, trying to reassure herself that this was simply another family meeting sparked by Eric's declining health, she had no idea that the patriarch's trembling hands were holding not just medical reports, but a truth forged in silence decades ago, a truth rooted in DNA and sealed by fear, regret, and a promise never meant to be broken. And when Eric finally spoke, his voice cracked not from weakness, but from the unbearable weight of what he was about to confess, explaining that as his time grew shorter, he could no longer carry the burden of a secret that had already begun poisoning the next generation. Because long before Hope was born, before Brooke's life became entwined with the Forresters in ways both glorious and painful, a mistake was made during a medical emergency involving Stephanie, a rushed blood transfusion, mislabeled samples, and an experimental genetic compatibility study quietly conducted at the hospital under Eric's authorization. A study meant to save a life, but one that uncovered something far more dangerous. And as Hope listened, confusion turned to dread when Eric revealed that years later, when Hope herself faced a medical scare as a child, he insisted on advanced DNA screening, not out of concern alone, but because the hospital records from the past had resurfaced, showing anomalies that could no longer be ignored, anomalies that suggested Hope's genetic profile carried markers inconsistent with what anyone expected. And as Eric paused, fighting tears, Brooke sensed the ground shifting beneath her, while Ridge clenched his jaw and Steffi instinctively stepped closer, because they all felt it then that this confession was not just about the past, but about a future already unraveling. And when Eric finally said the words aloud, Hope felt the air leave her lungs as he revealed that her DNA carried a dormant but deadly genetic condition passed down through a bloodline no one believed she belonged to, a condition linked to a Forrester lineage long buried by scandal and denial, and worse still, medical experts now believe the condition could be activated by extreme emotional trauma, making Hope's recent heartbreaks not just painful, but potentially fatal. And as Brooke demanded to know what Eric was implying, he admitted that Hope was never supposed to know, because the truth implicated choices that would destroy multiple families, revealing that decades ago, a child was switched briefly during emergency care, switched back too late to undo the genetic exchange that occurred during a pioneering but secretive marrow infusion intended to save Stephanie, meaning that Hope, through no fault of her own, carried Forrester DNA altered by experimental intervention, tying her fate biologically to Eric in a way no legal document ever could. And as Hope processed the words deadly DNA, her knees buckled and tears streamed down her face, because suddenly every unexplained illness, every dizzy spell, every emotional collapse made horrifying sense. And when Eric admitted that recent test results showed the condition was progressing faster than predicted, triggered by the emotional chaos surrounding Hope's love life, her losses, and her endless efforts to be strong for everyone else, Hope finally broke down completely, sobbing that her entire life had been built on lies, and that even her own body had betrayed her, while Brooke screamed that this couldn't be real, accusing Eric of playing God with people's lives. But Eric only whispered that he had already played God. once and paid for it every day since. And as the family erupted into arguments, blame, and denial, Hope retreated inward, her tears no longer just grief, but terror, because Eric then dropped the most devastating truth of all, revealing that there was no known cure once the condition reached its final stage, only experimental treatments with dangerous risks, and that the latest scans suggested Hope might already be nearing the point of no return unless drastic measures were taken immediately. Measures that could alter her DNA permanently or shorten her life even further. And as silence fell over the room, punctuated only by Hope's quiet sobs, Eric looked directly at her and told her that he was so sorry, that he loved her as family even if he never had the right to say so, and that the reason he was confessing now was because he believed Hope deserved the truth before she made any more sacrifices for people who would never fully understand the cost she had already paid. And at that moment, Hope's tears turned into raw anguish as she cried out that she had spent her entire life trying to be good, to believe in love, to hold on to hope itself even when everything fell apart. And now she was being told that the very thing she stood for was killing her from the inside. And as Liam rushed forward to hold her, guilt etched across his face as he realized his indecision and betrayals may have pushed her closer to the edge. Eric warned him that stress and emotional devastation were accelerating factors, making every broken promise and every moment of heartbreak a potential trigger. And as Hope clung to Liam, shaking and sobbing, Brooke finally collapsed into a chair. Realizing that her daughter's future was now a ticking clock she could hear but not stop, while Ridge confronted Eric, demanding to know why he had waited so long, and Eric answered with devastating honesty that he was afraid. Afraid of destroying Brooke, afraid of losing Hope's trust, and afraid of admitting that his greatest sin wasn't infidelity or business betrayal, but the silent manipulation of science to protect the woman he loved, Stephanie, at the expense of a child yet to grow up. And as Hope listened through her tears, something inside her shifted, because beneath the fear was a rising clarity that this truth, as cruel as it was, had freed her from illusions she had carried her entire life, and wiping her tears, she whispered that if her time was limited, then she refused to spend it being pulled apart by secrets and lies, declaring that she would face the truth head on, even if it meant walking away from everyone who had helped break her heart. And Eric, overcome with emotion, told her that there was one final piece of information she needed to know, something he had withheld until this moment because it carried both hope and horror, revealing that a rare compatibility match existed that could potentially stabilize her condition, but the donor would have to be a direct genetic mirror created by the same experimental lineage, meaning only one person in the world might be able to help her. And as everyone waited in stunned silence, Eric revealed that the match was a member of the Forrester family who had no idea they carried the same altered DNA, setting the stage for an impossible choice that would test loyalty, love, and sacrifice like never before. And as Hope burst into tears once more, not just from fear, but from the unbearable weight of knowing that saving her life might cost someone else everything. The room filled with a haunting realization that Eric's deadly DNA secret had not only changed Hope's destiny, but had ignited a chain reaction that would redefine the Forrester and Logan families forever. Because from this moment on, love would no longer be enough, truth would no longer be optional, and Hope itself would have to fight to survive against the very blood that bore its name. Hope didn't realize she was still crying until her chest began to ache and her breaths came out in shallow, trembling gasps, and as the room spun around her, she felt the crushing irony of her name pressing down harder than ever. Because Hope had always been her anchor, and now it was the very thing slipping through her fingers. Yet even as the shock lingered, Eric's revelation about the potential donor ignited a new storm, one that rippled through the Forrester family with quiet panic and unspoken fear. Because suddenly every glance became suspicious, every shared genetic tie a possible life or death verdict, and as Steffi exchanged a look with Ridge, both of them instinctively understanding the implications, Hope sensed that this wasn't just about saving her anymore, but about exposing another layer of buried secrets that could tear the family apart. And when Brooke finally found her voice again, hoarse and trembling, she demanded to know who this mysterious match could be. But Eric only shook his head and said that revealing the name prematurely could cause irreversible damage, because the procedure itself carried enormous risk and the donor would have to choose freely knowing the consequences could alter their own future forever. And at that moment, Hope pulled away from Liam's arms, wiping her tears with shaking hands, insisting that she didn't want anyone to sacrifice themselves out of guilt or obligation, because she had already lost too much to other people's choices. And her words cut deeper than any accusation, especially when Liam broke down, confessing that he would give anything to undo the pain he'd caused her, only for Hope to whisper that love offered too late could be just as dangerous as betrayal. And as the tension thickened, Eric revealed that the experimental treatment required weeks of preparation and intense emotional stability, meaning Hope's life would have to slow down, her heart shielded from further trauma, a cruel demand for a woman whose life had been defined by emotional battles. And when Hope laughed bitterly through her tears, saying that emotional stability had never been an option for her in this family, Steffi flinched, realizing that every feud, every rivalry, every whispered judgment might have contributed to the crisis now unfolding. And as silence settled again, Hope made a decision that stunned everyone, declaring that she needed time away from Los Angeles, away from the constant drama and expectations. Because if she was going to fight for her life, she had to do it on her own terms, and Brooke immediately protested, refusing to let her daughter face something so terrifying alone. But Hope gently insisted that this was something she had to do herself, because for the first time she needed to listen to her body instead of everyone else's demands. And Eric, with tears streaming freely now, admitted that her strength was exactly why the secret had haunted him for so long, because even as a child, Hope had carried herself with a quiet resilience that made adults forget how fragile she truly was. And as Hope prepared to leave, the weight of what remained unsaid lingered heavily in the air, especially when Ridge pulled Eric aside and demanded to know whether the potential donor was one of his children, and Eric's silence was answer enough, sending a ripple of dread through Ridge as he realized that the choice ahead could pit sibling against sibling, parent against child. And as Hope walked out of the Forrester living room, tears still falling but her head held high, she felt an unfamiliar clarity settle in, because no matter what happened next, the truth was finally hers. And though the deadly DNA secret had shattered her world, it had also stripped away the lies that kept her trapped, leaving her with one undeniable reality. Her life was precious, her time mattered, and whether she survived or not, she would no longer allow anyone else to decide her worth. And back inside the mansion, Eric collapsed into a chair, whispering that he had waited too long, knowing that the storm he unleashed was only just beginning, because the moment Hope burst into tears wasn't just the breaking point of one woman's life. It was the beginning of a reckoning that would force every Forrester to confront the true cost of their secrets, a reckoning that promised heartbreak, sacrifice, and a fight for survival that would change everything forever. Hope barely slept that night, her tears drying only to return in silent waves as the reality of Eric's confession replayed again and again in her mind, because every memory now felt tainted by the possibility that her body had been quietly betraying her all along. And as dawn crept through the curtain, she felt a strange mix of fear and determination settle into her bones, realizing that the deadly DNA secret was no longer just a sentence hanging over her head, but a challenge demanding she finally put herself first. And when Brooke called in the early hours, her voice breaking as she begged Hope to come home, Hope listened through fresh tears yet held firm, telling her mother that love couldn't mean control anymore, that if she was going to survive this, she had to step away from the emotional storms that had defined her life. And Brooke, devastated but slowly understanding, promised through sobs that she would respect Hope's wishes even if it broke her heart. And miles away at the Forrester mansion, tension simmered as Ridge confronted Steffi and Thomas, the unspoken question hanging between them like a blade, because any one of them could be the genetic match Eric had hinted at, and the possibility twisted loyalty into fear, especially when Steffi quietly admitted that she would do anything to save Hope, even if it meant risking her own future, while Thomas said nothing at all, his silence louder than words. And as Eric watched his family fracture under the weight of his secret, he finally allowed himself to grieve not just for Hope's uncertain fate, but for the damage his choices had inflicted, understanding too late that love rooted in fear always demanded a brutal price. And somewhere on a quiet road leading out of Los Angeles, Hope wiped away her tears and stared ahead, knowing that whatever lay ahead, treatment, sacrifice, or loss, she would face it with honesty at last. Because even if her name had become a cruel irony, she refused to let it be. Meaningless, and as the sun rose higher, one truth became painfully clear. The deadly DNA secret had not ended Hope's story. It had only stripped it down to what truly mattered: truth, choice, and the courage to keep going even when everything else had fallen apart.